Hello, hello. I'm Jordan, a knitter and designer in Georgia, and this is Andalusia Knits, my knitting podcast where I discuss all things knitting, my projects, my designs, my plans. I talk about it all. And today I have a jam-packed episode for y'all. I have quite a few finished objects, several of which I don't believe I've discussed at all on the podcast before. I have several works in progress as well, and I have branched out into a new craft that I will discuss a little bit at the end of this episode. And as I sat down to record this episode today, I realized that I am right about at the 1 year mark for this podcast series. I might have actually gone a little past that. And so while I want to do some sort of official 1 year anniversary episode in the near future, I just wanted to take a moment while I remembered the 1 year anniversary of this to say thank you to everybody who has watched these videos, who has commented on these videos, and shared these videos. Whether you've been here since episode 1 or you just started tuning in the last episode, I really appreciate the support. I really appreciate the views. This has been such a fun experience here on YouTube. I didn't really know what to expect when I started releasing these podcast episodes, but the response has been so warm and so welcoming, and I just wanted to take a moment here at the beginning to say thank you to all of you who have tuned in, and I hope that you enjoy the next year of podcast episodes that I'm about to get into as well. So I don't want to spend much more time in the intro. Like I said, I have a giant stack of stuff over here. I don't know, you can kind of see the top of it peeking out. But before we get into the good stuff, I do want to take a moment and say, if you enjoy knitting podcasts or knitting videos in general, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you never miss an upload from me. But with that, let's go ahead and get into today's episode and all of this knitting. My first finished object today, I have shown a couple times on the podcast, I believe in the past, and it is this modular knit blanket, and I don't think that there is any way I'm going to be able to get all of this in frame at once, so I'll go ahead and just pop up a video here on the side to show you what it looks like in its full glory. But this blanket is the second sample that I have knit up for a pattern I'm currently working on for a modular knit blanket design. So when I started knitting this specific sample, my thought was this is the last sample I'm going to be knitting. The idea behind the design is that it creates different designs depending on how many colors you choose to use. So for example, this is the 2-color plus the border color version, and it creates kind of this pyramid look that you'll see over in the video. And then I also have a 3-color version that I did initially, which creates more of a traditional like quilting block, log cabin style blanket sort of design. And I thought that I liked this idea of like producing a 2-in-1 pattern. And I thought that for this one, the only 2-in-1 aspect was going to be the design, was going to be on how many colors you choose to knit it with. But as I was starting to knit this one, I had a thought that it would be fun to like kind of make this like a 2-in-1 pattern. And so in addition to being able to offer 2 different designs in 2 different color schemes, I wanted to also be able to offer up 2 different construction methods. So this blanket that I've knit here, and I'll show you the back, you can see that it is full of seams. And these seams are created by basically you're knitting a section of the blanket and then you're picking up stitches along the edge of that section that you just knit to create the next section. And that creates these really nice, just like straight, clean seam lines. But I started having the thought, what if I create a version where instead of like knitting a section and then picking up stitches along that section for the next one, what if instead you knit all of the sections separately and then seam them together after the fact? And so while this pickup version creates very just nice, like clean pickup lines, this seam together version I want to make it more decorative seaming. And so like I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel. I need to pull out some of my stitch dictionaries and stuff and some of my books and see if I can find any examples of like decorative seaming styles in those. But basically, I'm looking for a method of seaming that intentionally is drawing attention to itself. Like it's meant to be a design element. And so I don't want to do just like basic like mattress stitch or just basic like horizontal to vertical seaming. And just try to disguise it as much as possible. Instead, I want this version to be more intentionally decorative in the seaming. But anyways, so I finished up this second version of the blanket, and I was a little worried about the color choices because, as you can see, let me get here in the corner, you have like this rust red and this dusty pink, and then an olive green for the border. And ultimately, everything worked out fine. The color scheme worked out fine, but I was a little scared when I started knitting the border because as I knit the body, obviously the body took about a month to knit. And so for the longest time, the blanket was just pink and red. And so starting subconsciously and then eventually consciously, I started like thinking and referring to this blanket as the Valentine's Day blanket because of the pink and the red. And so then when it came time to incorporate the green, I'm like, wait. Olive green is not a Valentine's Day color. Is this going to look good at all? And so I went ahead and just like braved it and bit the bullet and knit the border. And it looks fine. The colors go great together. It has this nice sort of like vintage 70s feel to it, I think. But the green ended up being fine because it was never intended to be a Valentine's Day blanket at all. It was just because the body was all in this pink and red, I had started associating it with Valentine's Day. And like I said, olive green doesn't go in a Valentine's Day color scheme. But everything ended up working out great on this one. I love the way this turned out. I love sort of, I know I'm trying in vain to show this entire thing. I love sort of like the dueling pyramid design you get with the two color version. And I'm excited to start on a third version of this. Like I said, I still need to figure out specifically how I'm going to do this like decorative seaming technique, and see if I can find one or if I'm going to have to like experiment and create one myself. Next up is a project that I just want to talk about briefly because I technically recently released an entire project diary of me knitting and constructing this thing. But it's so much fun, I can't not talk about it again. And that is this fish hat that I knit. And I will do my best to put it on. It's probably going to go out of frame because it is ridiculously tall, as you can see. But I absolutely love this thing. This was kind of a last minute fast knit for me. So I play in a community orchestra, and we had a small concert at the library that was ocean themed recently, and they wanted us to dress up like sea creatures. And so I knew I needed to find a knitting pattern of like a fish hat or some sort of underwater thing. And I stumbled upon this pattern, which is the Fish Hat Dead or Alive by Thelma Egberts. And this is a pretty popular pattern as far as fish hat designs go. But this was so much fun to knit. And if you want to see like the details and me going more in depth about how this thing is actually constructed in terms of knitting the body and the fins and the eyes and then figuring out how to stuff it, I will link to that video in the description below so you can check that out. But yeah, like I said, I just wanted to show this off for a moment because I love this thing. There's never a bad time to show off the fish hat. And while it was a little awkward to wear on the head, like I said, you kind of have to really balance this thing and make sure that it's not going anywhere. I could also see this as working as like a toy or a stuffed animal because really the only thing you would have to do differently is like maybe like knit a panel for the inside of the mouth to seam around the perimeter of the mouth so that you don't see the stuffing. But yeah, I think this could work just as nicely, I think, as a toy as it did as a hat. And now I believe originally, let me take this stuffing out. I believe the original intention is to kind of wear it flat. And while that does make it a little less conspicuous, makes it a little bit more hat-like, it is still very much a fish. I don't know. Uh, I don't know if I would rock this around town, but this is such a cute design, especially, I imagine it's more geared towards children, which is why I knit it for a children's concert. But this was so much fun to knit. And like I said, if you want more details on how I did this, I will link to the Project Diary video where I go through all of that in the description below. Next up, I have another strange hat. And while it's maybe not as crazy or bizarre as the fish hat, it was inspired by the fish hat partially. And so I have, sort of on a whim, knit a really, really long hat. And I don't know if there is specific terminology for hats that are like ridiculously long like this. The best I could come up with was like a stocking cap, I think, was what I could find. But I wanted to knit this because it is not just a long hat, it's actually a hat plus a scarf built into the end, which is why it's got this fringe on the end. And this is the ridiculous knitted item that I did not know that I needed, but I have completely fallen in love with since I've knit this thing. So like I said, this was partially inspired by the fish hat in the sense that the fish hat is also abnormally long. It's not as abnormally long as this, but it's much taller than a regular hat is, which sort of got me thinking about these sort of like long sort of stocking cap style hats that you don't really see anymore. As a kid, the one time that we went skiing in Colorado, I remember being very enamored with like the fashion of the ski resort, and there was a lot of like ridiculous headgear like this with just like really long tails and stuff like that. Now the skiing itself, I was absolutely terrified of. I hated it. I did it once and never tried it again, and just sat in the lodge for the week while my parents see that they wasted all that money on a ski trip. But like I said, really into the fashion. So these long caps, that was probably the first place that I ever encountered one. But then oh my God, that hair, that was rough. But then as I was doing some research into knitting patterns that might already be like this, I saw that they do exist. They are definitely very vintage though. So like I was getting like hits from like patterns in like the 40s and 50s and that sort of thing. So these definitely have a long history. They're definitely not, continuously popular from the past into the present, but I'm going to do my best to bring them back into fashion. And in thinking about what I want to do differently and how I would want to make this design my own, I noticed in a lot of the patterns, you get these decreases. It starts, the width of a normal hat, and then it just decreases and decreases until it comes to like a point in the tail. And while people were wrapping that around their necks like a scarf as well in some of these pattern photos I saw, it definitely looked more like, oh, this is just a hat with a long tail that someone's wrapped around their neck. And so I wanted to try my best to make this end look at like an actual scarf. And so I did a couple things that some of them worked, some of them didn't work. So the first thing I did was eventually I stopped decreasing the hat. It doesn't come to a point. It comes to a fixed width, and then it stays that width until the end of the scarf. And I think that was a good idea. That was the right thing to do. A lot of the weirdness that I was noticing was that like the very teeny tiny points of the hat was like showing in the front, and I wasn't crazy about that in the photos. The other thing I did was add some fringe to the end. Now, I am not really a fringed scarf girly that much. I have only ever done this once, like 5 years ago, adding fringe to any sort of scarf. And so this is not secured at all. I just sort of like took some of the yarn that I knit it with and ran it through the ends of this. And so I seamed up the end of this with a 3-needle bind off, and then I just like ran the yarn through both sides of the scarf. And it looks cute. Like I said, there's nothing securing it. I'm definitely going to have to go back as I knit more experiments of these and find a better way to like attach tassels or fringe or whatever to the ends of the scarf. And so those two things worked out really well in terms of making this read more scarf-like. The one thing that didn't particularly work was that once I got to the scarf portion of the hat, I stopped doing a complete stockinette in the round, and I started doing, and you can't really see them, I don't think, but I started doing some purl stitches on both sides just to kind of like make it. My thought was that it would like make it lie flat better. And for whatever reason, I don't know why I mistakenly thought this. I was like, and yeah, when it lays flat, those purl stitches will like squish out, and you kind of have like a decorative edge. And obviously, that's not what happens. Purl stitches like recede in, and so you just kind of do have like a kind of a seam line, but it's not visible at all. So I will go back. I'll have to do something different with that. Figure out how to like make these edges look edge-like, make this part look flat as opposed to round like the hat portion. But doing some purl fake seam stitches on both sides is definitely not the way to do that, I don't think. But I had so much fun knitting this thing, and I am ready to knit round two. In my mind, for the second version I knit, I'm like imagining it in like sort of like a creamy white with maybe some like flecks of brown or something in it. And I would like to do maybe some like cable designs. Like the plain stockinette is fine. That's normally my MO for hats I wear. But I want to go a little bit fancier with this. And so I'd like to do some cable designs, and I'd like to do different designs on the hat portion versus the scarf portion. Once again, to sort of better delineate that, hey, this is not just a really long hat that you can wrap the tail around your neck. Like the whole point is to like make it look like a hat and scarf combo. But yeah, that's for the future. I don't have any yarn picked out. I don't have any specific designs picked out, but that's sort of where my mind is in terms of version 2 of this. And there will absolutely be a version 2 of this. This was so much fun. It was really silly to knit. It was kind of ridiculous. And I was like, my thought was like, okay, well, even if it turns out bad, like at least this is like a funny knit. This is something funny to pull out and show people. But very pleasantly surprised at, while it is kind of a funny knit, it doesn't look half bad when you got it on. So I'll be excited to see how this progresses in the future. Now I've got a project that it's basically a finished object at this point, but not quite technically. So I'm putting this sort of as the transition between the finished objects and the works in progress. And that is the Whidbey bag by Wool and Pine. And the worst of this is over. As you can see, the body of the bag itself is finished at this point. I just have to find something to act as a drawstring for it now. So this is so cute. I love the finished look of this. This is absolutely 100%, 200%, 300%, however many percent. It's absolutely a project knit because the process of making this thing was so bad and tedious. And this is not a dig about Wool and Pine. The pattern is perfectly fine. Like I said, I love the finished result. The pattern is well written. It's not anything bad in terms of the pattern. It's just bad in terms of what the pattern is asking you to do. And what the pattern is asking you to do is first just knit this plain stockinette in the round bag at a pretty dense gauge with worsted weight yarn. And that was just like a slow, very sort of slog of a process. You know, it's one of those things. Sometimes stockinette in the round is fun because you just want a mindless knit. You got other things to do. And other times it is just really painful because it's so same old, same old, same old. It's so boring. And that's definitely how I felt when I was knitting that. And so then after I got the body of the bag knit, I was like, oh, thank God, that's over. The worst is behind me. Now I get to do all these fun, colorful woven stripes. And so yeah, in the design, basically you knit the body of the bag and then you go back with scrap yarn and you weave horizontal stripes around the outside of the bag, and that helps to reduce the stretch in it. And while the finished result is beautiful, I would say the weaving process was maybe even worse than the knitting process, just because of how slow and tedious it was, especially as I started from the top and worked my way down to the bottom of the bag, and the deeper into the bag I got, the more just like fidgeting and readjusting I had to do to get the needle and everything in place like it needed to be. And so I'm so glad this is done, both because I want to use this bag and show it off because it's so cute. But I'm also glad it's done because I never want to do this again. It was such a slog. Like the results are absolutely worth it, but it was a little hard to actually craft this one. And so let me flip to the inside now that I've complained about this thing so much and give you one more complaint. And so when you do the weaving of the stripes, basically every stripe was a different color. That's how the pattern photos looked, and that's how I wanted to do it. And so that leaves you with a ton of loose ends on the inside of this thing. Now I've already gone ahead and like knotted them and trimmed them, but before I did this, it was just a ton of loose ends, and so every stripe is also 3 strands. So it was like 6 strands per stripe that I was having to deal with, and it just created so much bulk on the inside of this. Now that I have everything knotted up and trimmed up, the bulk has definitely been reduced a little bit. It's still kind of visible. You know, you can kind of see that one side just looks a little bit. I don't. Well, actually, on camera, you can't really see that one side looks and feels a bit thicker, so maybe it's not as bad as I thought. But yeah, there's just a little bulk there. If I was gonna do this again, and I'm not gonna do this again, but I'm always constantly thinking about like, what would I do differently in this project if I did it again? And the thing I would do for this is I would not use scrap yarn. I would absolutely find some sort of beautiful gradient yarn so that I could just continually weave this thing and not have to like be constantly like cutting off new lengths of yarn and constantly having to be trying to manage all those loose ends. I'd absolutely turn this from a scrap project into a full skein of yarn project. But as much as I've complained about this thing, once again, I keep coming back to it is just so beautiful. I love the effect of these woven horizontal bars of yarn. It's so cute. I do have one thing left to do, and that is figure out something to act as a drawstring. So at the top of here, this plain knitting part, it's actually like a tunnel or a tube. And the pattern originally suggests for you to knit I-cords to act as the drawstrings. And so I actually did that, and I ran an I-cord through these, and I got real worried immediately the moment I tried to cinch it, because I could just like feel and hear the friction of this like wool scraping, this wool I-cord scraping against this wool tunnel that it's going through. And I was like, that is gonna like fuzz up immediately. That's gonna look so bad so quickly. Like just a few like cinches is gonna really, that's so much friction. It's just not, I didn't think that an I-cord was the way to go. And so now I'm just like, I need to go to like Michael's or something and just like buy some like leather strips. I don't even know if they got those at craft stores anymore, but just something, some sort of like leather or something. I don't know why leather is popping up in my head. But just some sort of like smooth something that I can run through these and cinch up, that it's not going to create as much friction as like the wool rubbing against the wool did as I was running the I-cords through. But once again, this is the Whidbey bag by Wool and Pine. It is so cute. It is such a beautiful finished object. It's such a wonderful item to have, and it was such a terrible item to craft. So knitter beware, you do this project at your own discretion. Next up, it's going to be a little sad. I got an in memoriam section for a design that I've been working on for quite a while, and that I've decided to put on the back burner because the long hat has taken its place as the apple of my eye currently. And that is this hat design that I was working on, that you've seen in previous episodes if you've watched the podcast before, where I was trying to create a design that would work in both traditional stranded color work, which is, you know, done in all stockinette, and this textured stranded color work that I have been into for the last year or so, where you knit the background color and you purl your contrast color, so it creates this sort of like textured raised color work effect instead. And while I had pretty good success, I sort of ran into a roadblock. Like, I think that where I got it to, it looks pretty nice in both the regular and the textured color work. But I wasn't particularly pleased with this top section, this top like part where it's just like a empty diamond. It just didn't look like it had enough going on. And so I went back and redesigned the motif, and I'm just not particularly pleased with the results. Like, there's more stuff going on, but it just looks a little too busy, and especially this top part, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like stuff for the sake of having stuff up there. And this was a tricky design all the way through, just simply because there are some like considerations with this textured color work that you have to think about that you don't necessarily have to worry about with regular color work. And so I wasn't happy with this swatch, and I had every intention of like going back to the drawing board and trying again with a new swatch. But then, like I said, Long Hat, which is still over here beckoning me, Long Hat came into my life, and it has taken all my attention away from this other hat. And so I will come back to this eventually. Because, like I said, once again, like the bottom part is fine. It's just this top diamond part that I'm not happy with. And so I can do some more finagling with the chart and see if I can come up with something else. But I'm gonna like put that off for a while and just not worry about it. I got three decent looking hats out of this that I can wear or give away to people. Like there's nothing wrong with the designs. They're just kind of a little basic at this point. But yeah, so that is my sort of color work hat that is going to be going away for a while. Now I've got a work in progress that I just started on yesterday. Like there's very little finished on this, but I wanted to go ahead and show it. And I am knitting a second sample of my knitting pattern, the walking distance scarf. And I literally just have a couple inches here. You can barely tell what's going on at all. But I wanted to do a second version of this scarf for a couple reasons. And the first one was that the original sample I knit was all done monochromatic. It was all in different shades of like gray and black and white. And I'll throw up a picture of it over here. And while I was very like proud of my ability to sort of like make something visually interesting with all these different shades of boring gray, I wanted to do another sample that showed the scarf maybe in colors that are a bit more bold and a bit more like in your face. And so now I'm doing a version in a couple different shades of blue, and then also this gray. This yarn, when I bought it, it looked like a dark gray, and now that I'm sort of knitting with it, it's sort of looking a lot more like solidly, not solidly black, but it's looking a lot blacker than it did in the skein, which is kind of nice. Because like I said, I wanted to lean into like a more bold color scheme for this, and so that's working out nice. And the other reason I wanted to knit this second version was because the yarn is very special and kind of sad to me. This is another in memoriam section. So the yarn is Lore by the Fiber Company, which is a yarn company that is no longer in business, which was devastating for me a couple years ago when they announced that, because basically every one of their yarns, every line they had, I absolutely loved. And I particularly loved Lore because it was just it's a nice, just like traditional two-ply woolen spun yarn. And at least in the United States, it's not impossible to find woolen spun yarns here, but it's much more difficult than finding worsted spun yarns. And so basically a woolen spun yarn, without getting super technical, a woolen spun yarn is a yarn that is spun in a way that it maximizes the amount of air that's trapped between the fibers, which creates a really like lightweight, lofty effect. And so the reason that's so nice is because I can knit this super, excuse me, I can knit this super duper long, like 75-inch long scarf, and it's not like weighing me down on my shoulders because the yarn itself is so lightweight. It just feels like wearing a cloud. And so I wanted to knit another woolen spun version of this specifically because the first one was just so nice, and I wanted to do it in Lore because this is probably the last project I will ever knit with this yarn since the Fiber Company is now out of business. And I just started this one, like I said, yesterday, so not a lot of progress, but it's a pretty quick knit. It is knit in Intarsia, but it's very beginner friendly, very intuitive and simple Intarsia. You're only ever working with like 6 balls of yarn. And so it's never like a color work nightmare or anything like that. It's a great first entry point into the world of Intarsia if you've never tried it, if you've been sort of scared off by it. I would suggest this pattern or a pattern like this where you're doing a lot of like big like blocks of color that are moving sort of like gently back and forth. because that's a lot better than your first Intarsha project being like a pictorial nightmare where you're trying to like create a scene or whatever out of a million different bobbins. I like that this is just a simple, pretty relaxing knit. It's not a completely mindless knit because you do have to kind of pay attention to the charts and how the colors are moving, but it's a nice like midpoint between completely mindless and just completely grueling. And so I'm excited to get started on this one again. And if you'd like to give the walking distance scarf a try yourself, I will make sure to leave a link to the pattern in the description below. Okay, so I know that I started this episode out by thanking all of my viewers for their support and kind words. And unfortunately, I'm about to have to betray you and break your heart because I am about to show you a couple granny squares that I have crocheted. And so if you don't want to see those, avert your eyes now. But here they are. This is my first foray into the world of crochet. I've got a single color granny square right here and a multicolor granny square right here. I started out with the single color thinking that like color changes would just complicate the process and make it harder. But weirdly enough, the multicolor one was way easier because it's a lot more visible, like where your stitches need to go versus where they shouldn't go when all of these different rounds are color coded. But I have started doing these little practice squares because if you've seen like I believe I talked about in the last episode, I have signed up for a crochet blanket course called the Homage to the Granny Square. And it is a blanket that is just like all sorts of different granny squares. It's a granny square explosion, just different sizes and shapes. Well, I guess they're not different shapes, different sizes and designs of granny squares that are then seamed together to create this beautiful, just sort of like patchwork looking blanket. And the course that I signed up for, they in the description it said, this it's not the hardest thing in the world, but it's probably not meant for a complete crochet beginner. And I saw that and I completely ignored it because I really wanted the blanket. And so then when it got time to actually start crocheting the blanket and I got to the pattern and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this. But thankfully, the designer of the blanket, Sue Matten, on her website, she also has a free learn how to crochet course. So basically now I'm like toggling back and forth between like learning new techniques in her how to crochet course and then applying those to the patterns in the granny square blanket course. And I haven't actually started knitting the blanket itself. It requires like picking like 15 different colors of yarn, and so I'm still in the process of working through all that. But I wanted to do some test squares with yarn I already had just to get like the technique and the feel of making these squares under my hands before I started doing the real thing. And like I said, that was absolutely the right call because I immediately knew that I was in over my head. I'm very surprised that in crochet, like, I cannot believe how intuitive and how beautiful and how amazing crochet charts are. And as much as I hate to say, like, how in many ways they might be superior to knitting charts because it really like documents what the finished fabric is supposed to look like. You see where the stitches are supposed to like grow out of in crochet charts in a way that you don't in knitting charts. But as much as I have loved reading crochet charts, reading crochet written patterns has been an absolute nightmare. Normally, I kind of roll my eyes when in the knitting world when people want like really like detailed like hand-holdy patterns. I'm like, I don't need all that. I'm a big boy. And then I got to these crochet patterns where it's like there's not a lick of like English in the thing. It's just like a string of like symbols and abbreviations and stuff, and it just doesn't make sense. As much as the crochet charts make sense to me, the written patterns just made no sense at all. So I've been having a lot of fun reading my charts and avoiding the written patterns as much as possible. And yeah, this has been great. It was a little bit iffy at first because I had some troubles figuring out what size neat or what size hook to use. So I knew that like the general like wisdom was that basically whatever the circumference of a knitting needle that you would use to knit for this yarn is, use that for use the same hook circumference for crochet. And for me, I'm a very looser than average knitter, and so like I have to go down quite a few needle sizes to hit gauge on a lot of patterns. And so I was just going by feel. Like I have like a just a cheap set of a bunch of crochet hooks, and so I was just going by feel. Like, okay, this is worsted weight yarn, and this crochet hook feels about like a 5 needle, which was what I would use a lot of times for knitting worsted weight yarn. And I was just having a really difficult time getting my hook through the stitches. Everything was just so impossibly tight to do. And so then once I started like looking at like the suggested hook sizes on the ball bands of the yarn and using those instead, everything got easier almost immediately. So while I am a looser than average knitter, it turns out that I'm probably a pretty standard tensioned crocheter, it seems like. But yeah, so those have been my crochet adventures. Like I said, so sorry that I brought this filth into this holy place of knitting, but I just wanted to share a little bit more of my crafting journey with it. It's been a lot of fun, and like I said, I hope to get my colors chosen for this blanket soon and get to knitting the real thing, because it's going to take a hot minute. The course itself is like released over like the course of 6 months, but I can already tell there's absolutely no way this is getting done in 6 months. I can already tell this is probably not getting done within like the next calendar year either, but that's okay. I'm having a lot of fun being a beginner at something again, and looking forward to getting good at it though. So next up, I have a bit of a pattern announcement. This is the Augur Cowl, and this is a knitting pattern that I released last summer, and it's a pattern that I am going to take offline temporarily soon and do a little finessing with. Now, the pattern itself, as it currently is, there's nothing wrong with it. Like there's not any incorrect information in the pattern, but I want to go back now that I have another year of pattern writing experience and redo some things that at the time I just didn't know how to do or didn't want to do. And so I just wanted to make this announcement that yeah, within the next probably couple weeks, I'll be taking this original version offline. It's currently a free download on Ravelry. So if you want to get the original version while it's still available, I would suggest you go ahead and do that right now. The pattern link is in the description as well. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with this free version that is currently available. It's more so that like I've gotten better at like creating a more streamlined like pattern and knitting experience since I've done this. And so I want to go and make some changes that will make the process of knitting this easier for people, and hopefully people will be more interested in knitting it. And so the main thing I'm going to do is it's originally knit flat. I'm going to go back and change that to in the round and make it more in the style of the other cowl releases I've done more recently. So the Chosen One cowl and the Procession cowl are both tubes that are knit in the round, and then have the ends of the tubes seamed together. So I want to translate the Augur cowl into that setup as well. I initially did it flat because this sort of like arrow thing was just going to be easier if I didn't have to worry about accommodating a jog. But I think at this point, I'll be able to do that. I'm more confident in my design skills than I was back then. But like I said, so this is going away. This version is going away soon so that I can work on a new and improved version of the Augur cowl. But if you'd like to try your hand at this free version, this flat knit version, it's still available on Ravelry for a couple more weeks. So grab a copy of that while you can. Alrighty, well, there you have it. Another episode is officially in the books. I hope that you enjoyed perusing my projects with me today. Thanks for hanging out if you made it this far. Once again, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy knitting videos like this and don't want to miss an upload from me. And if you would like more smaller, more frequent updates from me, I would also encourage you to check out my Instagram. It's starting to grow over there. I finally understand the concept of what a story is and why I would want to use it. So I've been doing that frequently. So like I said, if you'd like to see like smaller, more daily updates in my knitting and my projects and designing, Instagram is definitely the place to check out for that. But with that, I think I'm going to say bye, and I will see y'all in the next episode.